In this video, we will extend the knowledge from the third video, which introduced object orientation and inheritance. So we highly recommend you to watch the corresponding video first. First, we will insert a station into the frame. If we now open the dialog of the station, we will notice that there are inheritance checkboxes. If the inheritance checkboxes are green, we know that this object inherits its values and properties from a class. In turn, we also know that this station object is an instance of a class. As the name suggests, the classes of objects are generally stored in the class library. So if we look into the material flow objects, we can see the station class. Here we can now click on the station and select Show Inheritance. By doing so, a dialog will open which shows the instances of this class. As we can see, there are two instances of the class. The first one of these instances is the station we have inserted, which means that the values from our inserted station are inherited from this class. However, we have just inserted one station, and we do not have multiple frames. To quickly find the second station, we can now simply right-click on it and select Show. Now the frame which contains this station opens. As we can see, this frame is a default demo frame, which is placed in the user objects. We can simply delete the station and close the frame. As you can see, the station is still shown in the dialog. So we press the refresh button to update it. Now only the station we inserted is shown. What inheritance mean can be shown by an example. Therefore, we open the dialog of the station class. Then we change the processing time. If we now open the dialog of the station, we will see that the processing time is also changed. In other words, the value is inherited from the class. So a change in the class will be inherited to all instances. If we now change the processing time in the instance, we will see that the inheritance checkbox next to it will turn orange. This indicates that the instance no longer inherits the processing time from the class. For persons with color vision deficiency, an additional dash is placed in the inheritance box. Keep also in mind that changes made in the instance will not affect the class. So if we open the dialog of the class again, we will see that the value we entered in the instance is not inherited. Furthermore, we see that the inheritance checkboxes in the class are all orange. The reason for this is that the station's class is not derived from another class and therefore does not inherit any value. Since we cut the inheritance for the processing time in the instance, any changes made in the processing time in the class will no longer affect the instance. So if we change the processing time in the class now, and then look in the dialog of the instance, we will see that the changes are no longer inherited. So basically, all objects that are placed in a frame are instances of classes. It is not possible to place a class into a frame. To look up what the class of an instance is, we can simply click on Navigate in the dialog of an object and then click on Open Origin. This will then open the dialog of the class. In the title bar, we can then see where the class is placed. As we see, it is in the Material Flow folder. Another way to open the dialog of the origin would be to select the object and then click on Open Origin in the ribbon bar. Now we will collapse the Material Flow folder. Then we again select the object and this time hold the Shift key while clicking on Open Origin. This time the folder in which the class is placed will be expanded and the class will be selected. Now we want to create a custom station. We can therefore right-click the station class and then can either select Duplicate or Derive. The difference is that when we click Duplicate, we will create a new class, whereas Derive would create an instance of the class which would inherit its values from it. So we first duplicate the station. Then the station is placed into the User Objects folder. If we open the dialog, we can see that none of the attributes are inherited. Additionally, if we click on Navigate, we can see that the inheritance-related options are grayed out. However, if we derive from the station class, we will see that all properties are inherited. So we derive from a class if we want to inherit the attributes, and we duplicate the class if the new object should not be related to the original class. If you later decide that you no longer want the derived object to inherit its values, you can simply right-click on it and then choose Cut Inheritance. This will end the inheritance relationship to the original class from which you derived this object. If we now again open the dialog, we can see that none of the attributes is inherited anymore. We can also see that we no longer can show the origin. Now we will introduce multi-level inheritance. Therefore, we create a new Glassbox frame in the User Objects folder. If you are not familiar with Glassbox frames, we highly recommend you to watch the third video. We will now delete the default graphic and place a buffer and a station. Now we can rename this frame to MissStation. Then we build a production line with a source, a station, and 2 instances of MissStation. At the end, we add a drain. Now let's assume that we have run our simulation and noticed that the buffer capacity is not large enough. To adjust the buffer capacities, we can now simply look into the Glassbox frame and adjust the capacity there. If we now open the instances, we will see that they inherited this change. When you open the instances of MissStation in the model frame, you can right-click in the Glassbox frame. Now you have 2 options to return to the previous scene. You can either press the backspace button to get back to your model frame with the same camera settings, or you can select Open Location, which will return to the previous scene and set the focus on the instance. What a frame additionally offers is that also the structure is inherited. To showcase this, we pull the production lane apart. Let's assume now that we want to add an additional buffer after the station. To do so, we can add it in the Glassbox frame. As soon as we place the buffer in the Glassbox frame, we can see that the instances will inherit this structural change as well. However, keep in mind that after a structural change, you might need to adapt the connectors. What we can also do is to derive model frames. To do so, simply right-click our model frame and then click on Derive. Now a new model frame will be created. Then we open the newly created model. When we change the position of an object in the class, we will see that the model frame will inherit these changes. So basically also 3D properties are inherited. This can be shown when we open the 3D properties of an object in the instance frame. Here we again see the inheritance checkboxes. If you want to do changes in the instance, like changing the position of an object, Plant Simulation will show you a message which tell you that you are trying to do changes in the structure. However, to be able to do structural changes in an instance frame, we need to unlock the structure. To do so, we can switch to the frame ribbon and click Unlock Structure. We are now able to change the position. As soon as we do this, the inheritance for the position will be cut. So if we change the position in the class, the position won't change in the instance anymore. However, if we change the position of the second station, the changes will be inherited. If you now want that the station in the instance should inherit changes from the class again, you can open the 3D properties and click the Inheritance checkbox. Now the changes in the class will be inherited by the instance again. If we now open the Show Inheritance dialog of My Station, we will see the multi-level inheritance. At the top level, we see our class. The second and third level are the instances of the class in the first model frame. However, since we derived another model from the first model, we can expand both nodes. And then we will see that there are further instances in the second model that we derived previously. An use case of the derived frame might be to try different parameters on our model. However, for this purpose, the experiment manager that will be shown in later videos would be more convenient. What we can rather do in such derived frames is to evaluate different structural patterns. So let's assume that we are still not happy with the throughput, even we have 2 buffers. Now we want to consider if the duplication of the stations will increase the throughput. Therefore, we can now simply add a second station into the derived frame. After doing so, we could now evaluate if this increases the throughput, while still keeping the inheritance for the 2 other stations as we can see. In summary, inheritance is an outstanding functionality of plant simulation compared to the competition, allowing changes to be made once in the class and inherited by all instances. For example, if we assume a production that has 100 such stations, then it would be very time-consuming to change the parameters in 100 of these stations. Furthermore, also edited code will be inherited by the instances. So let's create a simple exit control in our class. If you are not familiar with exit controls or SimTalk, we highly recommend you to watch the corresponding videos. In this exit control, we will program that 10% of the parts will undergo a rework. To do so, we use a simple if-else condition. In the condition, we will use the uniform distribution and let it produce a number between 0 and 1. Then we will compare if the value is greater than 0.9. If this is the case, we will move the part to rework, which is done in the same station. To address the station, we can use the anonymous identifier question mark. If you are not familiar with anonymous identifiers, we highly recommend you to watch the corresponding videos. In the else branch, we will move the part to the successor. We can now save our control. If we now look at the instances, we will see that they inherited this control. We will now additionally use a variable to visualize the number of parts that are undergoing a rework. Therefore, we add a variable to our class. Then we rename the variable to rework count and set the initial value to 0. Now we open our control and increase the number every time a part undergoes a rework. As you can see, the variable object is not visualized in the frame where the object is inserted. This can be changed in the Edit 3D Properties dialog of the variable. Here we switch to the Graphics tab and uncheck Exclude from Show Content of the location. Only now the variable object will be shown like the station and the buffers. Therefore, we needed to uncheck that checkbox. However, this will be explained in more detail in later videos. Now we can simply start the model in our derived model and fast forward it a bit. As we can see, the number of reworked items are shown in the variable object. This concludes our video on object orientation and inheritance.